ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Today we're bringing you a conversation that was recorded at Adelaide Writers' Week with Tim Winton. Tim is one of Australia's greatest writers. He grew up in WA and he lives there still. If you've seen the incredibly lovely TV series he recently made with the ABC, you'll know how he feels about the Cape Range National Park in WA and Ningaloo Reef, which sits just off its coast. This area is also the location of Tim's latest novel called Juice, but it's set in the far-off future, in a superheated world, where people must live, as he says, like desert frogs, going underground for the murderously hot summer months, and then coming outside into the baking heat to grow and make what they can in the winter. The narrator in Tim's book is travelling with a child who's under his protection. They get taken hostage by a man with a crossbow who takes them down to the bottom of a mine shaft. And the narrator has to tell his life story to the bowman in the hope that he won't kill them. And so he talks of his childhood, eking out an existence with his proud and staunch mother, and then of his induction into a secret organisation called the Service, a group that's dedicated to exterminating the descendants of those who were responsible for the climate catastrophe, because these descendants are still living luxuriously in fortified high-tech hideaways dotted around the globe. I spoke with Tim in front of a huge crowd at the Adelaide Town Hall on the last night of Adelaide Writers' Week. Tim's a lovely guy and he was a bit embarrassed to be billed that night as a national living treasure. So I asked him if his kids had given him a hard time when he became a national figure and his breakthrough novel Cloudstreet got put on the school's syllabus.
Yeah, in fact, one of my kids quit literature for that very reason. And the other kids were probably slightly cleverer. They went the route of least resistance. They came sort of sleazing up from wanting tips, which, I was useless because I didn't really understand what the questions they were being asked, let alone what the answers were. I'm into my second generation of disavowal. It's oh, the shame.
Juice takes place on a peninsula in northwest Australia. I saw you in that wonderful ABC TV series on Ningaloo Reef, where it takes place. We saw you swimming with a gigantic spotted whale shark, which was the size of a bus. What do you remember of that encounter? We can see you at a distance, but I just wonder what it's like to be wearing the goggles and snorkel and being that close to the mouth of a gigantic, beautiful shark.
It's a very rare privilege because it's illegal. And touching an animal in the wild that big in a marine park, particularly an endangered animal, it was an incredible moment because the shark's not still, it's swimming. And so it's like hanging off the front of a moving bus or hanging off the rhubar of a Mack truck being pushed backwards in the water. The scientists had figured out that if you imitate cleaner fish that pick off parasites off their lips, the shark will slow down eventually and pull up and go vertical. I'd seen it done, I'd had it demonstrated, I'd watched the instructional video and all that, and then I had to do it, and I just thought, shit, I hope this works, because I know it's got no teeth, but it's a very, very big mouth.
Could you fit inside it?
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't probably get down the throat, but you could have some awkward moments. I mean, especially there's all that water being pushed through it and it's coming out its gills. And yeah, I mean, just imagine you've had a loose bit of clothing snagged, like you're caught in remember the pram racks on buses? It'd be like getting your sleeve caught in a pram rack of a bus.
Watching you stroke the mouth of this whale shark like it's a gigantic kitten, it reminded me of a bloke I interviewed once who told me he was scooping small fish off the outer end of the Great Barrier Reef where it dips away into the abyss, and he felt something creep up behind him and he turned around and behind him was a curious whale that had just sidled right up to check him out, and he had this really odd feeling of, I'm looking at the whale the whale is checking me out. There's a strange intimacy in that. Have you had that experience with a whale shark or a similar gigantic?
Yeah, sharks are quite aware. Very big animal, not very big brain in terms of the whale shark, but it's not a stupid thing. So you can feel yourself being observed and reacted to. It's not quite the same experience as swimming face to face with a humpback whale or a dolphin. But, a humpback whale has a bigger brain. It seems to have much more consciousness. And sometimes the encounters are quite long because a whale will stop. We'll just stop and look at you sometimes for 20 minutes. So you do have a long time to look into, it's like a big elephant's eye and it's looking at you, and you really do feel the impact of its gaze. You feel looked into. And also you can feel them feeling your body and your heartbeat and all of that. So it's a holy experience. It's a wonderful, privileged experience to feel that sense of creaturely connection, strangers in the day rather than strangers in the night. It's like, there you are. What are you? And we're both asking each other.
Except you're the anomaly, aren't you?
Yeah. Clearly the unskilled operator in the water. Look, this thing can't swim very well, but it is here, and they are very, very curious. And as Australia's whales recover from the brink of extinction on the west coast, we only had 300 left of the humpback, the western population D, in 1978 when I was 18. So now they're probably 40,000. And so they're becoming they're coming into contact with humans in negative ways, obviously, shipping and oil and gas, but also just in terms of just having encounters, random encounters with civilians in the water, just by sheer fact that there's a lot of us in the water and there's a lot of them in the water. And that's been interesting to get to my great age and to have grown up in the era of whaling, in a whaling town, and registered the sort of diminution of the giants of the ocean, and then to see that resurgence, and then to see their experience and our experience becoming richer. It's one lovely piece of good news in an otherwise slightly fraught world.
Seeing you in that footage as this little anomaly in the water next to this gigantic thing reminded me of how the sea, the ocean, can remind you of what a speck we each are. I had an experience once of almost drowning when I was in my late teens, and that brought that home to me. Have you had that experience of almost drowning?
You mean like feeling like cosmic dandruff?
Yeah, but that feeling like, oh God, I'm going to die here, and the earth doesn't need me. You lose that narcissism, I think.
Yeah, the first time it happened to me, I was 10. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't realise I was drowning for quite a long time. We were out pulling craypots and we got hit by a wave, and I was just suddenly under the boat, and it was very beautiful. And that was the distracting part, because I was just in this sort of penumbra of bubbles. And, anyone who's been knocked over by a wave at the beach and you open your eyes and you're just in this world of fizz. And when you're out in the deep water, that's just somehow everything's intensified. So, yeah, I didn't notice that I was drowning for a while. I can still remember, and I think I've written about this, I remember how pearly white my fingernails were and how interesting everything was. And then I feel, okay, I'm under the boat's capsized, I'm all caught up in fishing line and rope, and then suddenly my uncle's arm came under the boat and I think got me by the ear or the hair or something and just dragged me out. And then the awful part of drowning was my first breath. That's when I realised that I was just on the edge of dying, because how painful it is to drag your first breath in. But yeah, subsequently I've been near drowning a number of times, and I've found it a little more traumatic the older I've been. and less pretty.
After you finished the book, you went out to a reef that I'd never heard of called Scott Reef, which sits somewhere between Broome and East Timor.
Yeah, it's a bloody long way, yeah.
It's a long way out. What does it look like?
I guess from one perspective, it looks like any other coral atoll in the middle of the ocean. But What it really is a gigantic skyscraper that rises off the continental shelf from about 500 metres, 400 or 500 metres, and it comes very steeply up to right to the surface and pops out of the surface. So it's northernmost oceanic coral reef, so it's a long way out, a little bit closer to Timor than it is to the Kimberley. And it was an amazing place. I mean, it's to be 300 or 400 kilometres offshore and diving into a coral garden on the top of a seamount, it was an amazing. It's your dream of a coral garden, and so it was a great privilege to be able to be part of that expedition. Sadly, the moment I got in the water, I was just completely distracted from the glories that I was seeing because the water was 36 degrees. Everyone dreams of jumping into tropical water where it's lovely and warm, but this is almost the temperature of your blood. It was really, really unpleasant. And, with that German word, unheimlich, the uncanny, it just felt 50 kinds of wrong. I guess we realised from that moment that the sea temperatures were just too high. We pulled up the heat maps on the satellite and we could just see all this purple water. The heat goes right up until you get past the reds and into purple. And we knew enough about oceanic currents to know that it was headed our way. It was coming south. A couple of weeks later, the corals in the Kimberley started bleaching. A few weeks after that, 30,000 fish died in a single event on the Pilbara coast. And then in the last few weeks, Ningaloo Reef has begun an unprecedented and possibly catastrophic bleaching event, which we've been warning about for a generation and doing everything we can to avoid in terms of trying to change public policy, but here it is. It's been a hard summer, a tough summer.
Do you think we're living, after the long post-Cold War lull, we're now living in one of those kind of pivotal moments where history starts to speed up again?
Oh, undoubtedly. I think, we have a Manchurian candidate in the White House. I mean, we used to think that was a fantasy, that it was a kind of a fever dream. I can still remember the movie with Frank Sinatra, I think, wasn't it? And then there was one with Denzel Washington, a remake. And that's real. He's Putin's meat puppet. We just didn't think he'd be Tangerine. The whole post-war settlement, the order of things is being unravelled. And we just thought this might take months or years to do real damage. He's done it in days with a kind of a clack of oligarchs.
And what kind of obligation do you think that puts on fiction authors like yourself, being in one of those moments?
Well, to pay attention, for one thing, and to not turn away and not to evade the moment. So I think where we are with climate, where we are with the betrayal of Ukraine, the huge gap and widening gap of the haves and the have-nots, the florid injustices of our time, I think we are in a precipitate moment. And I think artists don't get a free pass. We are citizens and we have to do what we can, even if that is just simply to pay attention and to try to address the moment however we can.
I've been told that at the moment publishers are increasingly looking to build up a genre called romantasy, which is romantic escapist fiction. There's nothing wrong with any of that. That's all fine. But how hard is it? What are you up against in writing a book like Juice with that kind of mindset?
Oh, yeah, I was asking myself this a little bit over the years as I was writing it. It's like, what the hell do you think you're doing? People are paying, I could feel the book getting fat, a bit like myself. Fading away to a block of flats, as my uncle used to say. The book was getting bigger and bigger, and I realised that I was about to launch this book into a kind of an attention economy that was attenuated, fragmented. People are struggling to pay more attention because of the way we're living now, because of technology. I was also launching it into a dark wave of aversion. People just anxious to think about anything but that. You can just look at how many streaming bloody things have we got on the telly. There's nothing to see. That's a kind of response to the hardness of our moment. People just want to think about something else, even if it's tripe, perhaps especially if it's tripe.
How do you think art and literature writing can succeed where politics is failing?
I think story and I think politics is about facts and factoids and factish truthiness and trying to convince people of stuff. And, you know, even in good faith, that's hard to do. I think art goes to people's hearts and their minds in a way that politics struggles with, particularly at our moment in history. It takes a different route to people's consciousness, and I can remember big political moments in my life. I can probably remember, you know, snatches of great political speeches in my life, but nothing is going to resonate for as long as the great moments in cinema, the great moments in literature. I mean, Tom Joad's speech at the end of The Grapes of Wrath, to me, it's one of the great speeches of solidarity in our language, and it was never given on a dais, it was never given in a parliament. Yeah, I just think it cuts to the heart. And I don't mean that in an anti-intellectual way, I just think it means that a story carries a lot of water, and I think we dismiss the agency and the potential of the water-carrying capacity of story at our own peril.
The thing about writing a novel about this kind of catastrophic future, I found as a reader, is that while it's confronting to hear this language being used by activists or political leaders and the like, at the end of your novel, I felt a kind of a relief.
Finally, it's over.
No.
Please roll the credits.
The worst that's happened, and it's over now. It's finally come at last. No, it's more that it gets you out of your own head in a way that politics never can. Entering into the writer's imagination, you step out of your own self for a while.
It's disruptive, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you're ready to go back into your own world again after that, having seen this. And there's a strange sense of satisfaction that comes from all of this. It's an odd thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I find it's, you know, when I've had a really big experience in the cinema or in a concert hall or reading a book, I feel like the furniture has been moved. I feel unsettled. I feel like the shell's been ripped off, which I feel a bit vulnerable. I feel like sometimes, you know, I don't know if you ever know that thing where you've just seen an incredible film, everyone else has left the cinema, you can't quite get up yet because you think something will break. You just need to get all your bits reconstituted before you go out. I think a great work of art, you know, does shift the furniture.
There's a really obnoxious idea, and this is a bit of a Dorothy Dixer for you, because I know you hate this idea as much as I do, Tim, that art and literature and culture are like luxuries. They're like bathroom soaps, luxury bathroom soaps or something for times of prosperity and ease and comfort, when it's the other way around. I wonder if this era of prosperity that we live in softens our teeth a bit, softens us up for the need for art.
Yeah, I do find the idea objectionable, and also just it's illiterate and ahistorical. You have to look at all civilizations. I mean, art's integral to every form of human endeavour that's been recorded.
You seem to need it most when things are terrible, though. That's the thing. Simon Sharma gave a speech here where he told the story of a rabbi in the Warsaw Ghetto. All the books had been burnt or been taken away, and this rabbi had memorized all these great works of classical literature and made himself available to people in the Warsaw Ghetto as a human library. He would just read stories to them from it. And the same in Terezin or Theresienstadt concentration camp. The need for culture becomes overwhelming and almost as bad as the need for food and drink.
There are more than one form of nutrition. That idea of the human vessel of story, the human vessel carrying the spirit of inquiry, of curiosity, of wonder, and of witness. And I think we all have those people in our families and in our neighbourhoods, the people who are the keepers of the story, and you know, they are the keepers of the flame in a sense. All the stories, the family yarns, the the neighbourhood stuff. Every footy club's got somebody who remembers where everybody was and where everybody played on the day that. But this stuff's precious. This is what binds us together and helps us remain or become comprehensible to one another. So I don't think art is a luxury. I think it's a fundamental human need. And when you've when you go back to the documentary, when you're sitting in a midden in a rock shelter where got 1.5 meters underneath you of human bits of activity, of records of people eating and dancing and storytelling and taking shelter and learning and witnessing, and you can run your fingers through that and you can't get your hands down even into to the first few thousand years. You might be sitting on 30, 40, 50,000 years of human experience. And what do you find? You're finding bones, you're finding tools, you're finding art, you're finding symbolic activity. We were at the site where the oldest artifacts of symbolic activity, the Mandu necklace, where it was found. I mean, again, it makes you feel like cosmic dandruff.
The book pushes forward rather than backwards, and it takes place maybe, I don't know, a couple of 100 years into the future when the worst has happened, and it's still getting even worse during the course of the decades that the novel flows through. There's this marvellous scene where our narrator is talking about a moment when he's a kid and his feisty and staunch mother, staunch is a word that's often used, explained to him what the world is like with an orange. Can you just describe what happens in that scene?
Yeah, it's like his geography lesson. This is a world where people are living in very simple, humble conditions, but it's quite harsh. And he says to his mum, "What's the world like?" And she says, "Go and pick an orange," because they grow all this stuff indoors. And he picks the orange, and she pulls out a clasp knife, and she pares a big band out of the middle of it, right around its circumference, so that really more than a third of the orange is naked. And she puts it down on the bench, and she says, "Come back and have a look at it tomorrow, and then come back the day after that and the day after that." And he does, and she says, "Well, that's how the world is." And he just sees as the naked flesh of the orange in the middle just shrivels, he realizes that the whole middle of the earth, from the Tropic of Cancer to the Tropic of Capricorn, is largely uninhabitable, and it's shriveled. It's just got too hot. So in a way, he doesn't know why the world's like that, but it is a kind of a strangely organic image of what life is like for him and for them, and what it could be like for our grandchildren's grandchildren.
I've stood outside in the desert in WA and experienced 50-degree heat, and it was horrible, and I could stand it for about 5 minutes, I think. What's your experience of that been like, to stand outside in 50-degree heat?
At one level, it's exciting, because, I do find extremes a little bit exciting. But even knowing that I can retreat into an air-conditioned vehicle or house, when it's 50, your air-conditioned vehicle will cool your car down to the mid-30s, because it's just shit in the bed, basically. But even knowing that you can retreat to air conditioning, it's terrifying, particularly if it's dry. And if it's dry, it's safer. It's so dry and so hot that your eyelids dry out straight away, so your eyes dry out straight away. So if you blink, they often stick. So that's awkward. And the air feels like, the only way I can describe it is, those big fluffy hotel towels that you get when you go on holidays. You stick one of those in a tumble dryer and then try to breathe it. That's what the air feels like. It's fat and woolly, and you feel like you're choking. So for 5 minutes of that, your heart rate goes a bit funny. I don't know how many people in metropolitan Australia have experienced heat stroke, but it's a really awful thing to have happen. And I think we're not really aware of what's coming. The whole north of Australia is already becoming uninsurable. It's likely to become increasingly uninhabitable in our own lifetime. And where are all those people going to go? And some of them, many of them, are among the poorest and most neglected people on our continent. They're all going to come south. They'll have to. And this was instructive to me, I suppose, in the writing of the book. I mean, I was paying as much attention as I could to the scientific modelling insofar as I could understand it and have it interpreted for me by more competent people. But I was also learning, and we are learning in real time. Our bodies are telling us, some of us, particularly in the north of Australia, are living in a situation that's becoming less and less tenable.
This is Conversations with Richard Fidler. You can find more conversations anytime on the ABC Listen app.
The thing that really strikes me throughout Juice is there's a really profound sense of both the sacred and the violation of the sacred, sacrilege, I suppose, if you like. There's a moment where one of the characters looks at the barren landscape and she calls it the dying face of God. What is she talking about there, Tim?
She's just recently had both her legs amputated, so she's saying something provocative, I suppose, and she's passing it off as just the drugs talking. But I think really she's speaking to someone who she thinks is receptive to this idea that without nature, the sacred is less and less imaginable. And every religious tradition has a foundation of a connection to the natural world and the sacredness and richness of the natural world. When nature dies, so much of our imagination is denuded along with it. Every language that dies, every species that dies, every ecosystem that dies diminishes our palette, if you like. It diminishes our imaginative spectrum. And I think religions would become very eccentric and very strange without nature. I mean, where would you start? I think the bareness, the harshness of a world that we might be creating for those who come after us is a more savage, a more sad, a more pitiless, and a thinner existence, the one that we've known. And to me, that's not just something to feel elegiac about. It's not a tragedy, it's a crime. And it's a crime happening in real time.
The story of Genesis, the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, is referred to kind of tangentially in Juice. And you have the story of humans being cast out of paradise and have got to claw a living in pain from the stony earth. So I turned to the Old Testament and had a bit of a look at that phrase, and there's God's curse on Adam and Eve. In the book of Genesis, it's written, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground."
Yeah, as long as that's possible. That's the good story. That's the good news.
That's when
But at the same time, this is the moment at which humans become conscious. This is the moment at which humans become human beings rather than just hominids. And the pain of consciousness, and there are losses that come with consciousness. But in a weird way, I guess the book is imagining us having expelled ourselves from the garden all over again. The world is such a miracle. You know, the odds of us existing on this rock in all the vast reaches of space are so vanishingly small. The fact that we can live these rich lives, that we have these family connections, that we have these creaturely connections, it's a gift. Life, organic life is a gift. And it just seems so perverse that we should be destroying that gift and somehow not being cast out of the garden, but sort of climbing over the wall and setting fire to the garden and running out into the white glare thinking, we did it. We screwed the whole thing, you know?
Or perhaps even more specifically, pushing the grandkids out of the garden.
And I think that what upsets me is the lazy nihilism of our politics and of our commerce that can so easily come to terms with what it is that we're doing. And that enrages me. So I guess I was trying to find a human language for that in terms of making myself face this possible nightmare and putting faces on the people who will have to experience that, giving them stories, giving them imaginary lives, because that's what art is. It's a form of experience. An authentic artistic encounter is as close to what we now troublingly called lived experience as you can get. I mean, there's either experience in my book or vicarious experience, but art is the most intense form of vicarious experience. If it works, you feel that you were there and you are marked by that. And that's powerful. I don't think artists are as impotent as sometimes we like to conveniently tell ourselves so that we get out of having to do anything.
One of the characters, who is like the wife of the narrator, at one point she turns and asks the narrator, do you think the world is good or is it malign? Is it trying to shake us off like fleas off a chicken? I get the feeling reading that you're not sure. Are you, or what do you think?
I think that's also a question bound up in human nature as well. I think if you believe that humans are irredeemably corrupt, then there's no reason to think that the world isn't a malign place. I think if people are clearly capable of evil but aren't irredeemably corrupt, then the world is a place of potential. And also, for all the cruelties that you see in nature, the harshness of nature, there's so much potential. You see life striving and it's reaching. Organic things want to live, they want to increase. And humans are the same. And it's not just in that selfish wanting to claim, it's also they want to quest, they want to know, and they want to, above all, I believe, to connect. And connection and solidarity are central to the book, I guess.
Yeah, the narrator talks about how in his late teens he finds that solidarity by being inducted into a secret paramilitary organisation called the Service. And the Service is a bit like the Baader-Meinhof gang and a bit like the Provisional IRA. In order to be inducted into it, he's shown by the Service, the leaders of the Service, that people in our time, the time we're all in now, knew what was happening, what was coming, and didn't stop it.
And more importantly, didn't care enough to stop it.
Didn't care enough to stop it. What does that do to the narrator, knowing that his ancestors had eaten his future, the future?
Yeah, I mean, they'd essentially eaten their young. He's completely disordered by the realisation. And I think he's 16 or 17 when this happens. The entire conceptual foundations of his life are just swept away. Because like anybody, we like to think that our ancestors had at least some nobility. Not just dignity and not just purpose, but they had some nobility and honour. And he realises that the people who came before were greedy, nihilistic, selfish, and above all, remarkably callous. And so there's a kind of a humiliation in that he takes most of his life to recover from, really. And I've spent a fair bit of time thinking about humiliation and the fruits of humiliation. And I know Pankaj Mishra was here earlier this week, Pankaj has written an incredible book called The Age of Anger, and I found it very illuminating about the malignant force of humiliation on individuals, but on peoples. When a community is treated with contempt, made captive, occupied, and they take every civilised course of action available to them. They ask politely, they organise. But eventually, when you've been scorned, spurned, humiliated long enough, you just go to the last available opportunity, and that's violence. The kind of curdling effect of humiliation as it turns into violence just perpetuates poison. And, our news feeds every day and night are full of the fruit of humiliation. And, peoples who have been scorned and humiliated do whatever they can in their violent struggles to overcome or take vengeance. They perpetuate and extend suffering, even after liberation.
The service is in the business of going out and finding not the climate criminals, as they're called, but the distant descendants of the climate criminals who are holed up in these luxurious compounds or hideaways, living in luxury, attended by every good thing, and they see their job is to go and kill these people, and they come up with reasons to kill the children, even small children who are living in these compounds.
Yeah, they're kind of rooting out the potential for this class cohort of people to recover sufficiently to rule the world and bring back that dirty world, as they call it, again.
And they use all these euphemisms. They call a murder an acquittal. The victim is the object, which is what these organisations tend to do. And in the end, what it strikes you, and I think it strikes the narrator, is the work is cruel and futile. Yeah. It seems to me the point is to climb out of that nihilism in the end.
Yeah, and that is a trap. And in the book, the main character, wonders aloud all the creativity, all the genius that we were a part of in this secret global organisation to root out this kind of network of oligarchs and vassals. Couldn't we have put it to better use? And he realises that it's been wasted. But there's this kind of certainty of righteous fury that fuels people that I completely understand. I see it in local communities, we see it in world news. It's understandable, but it's ultimately poisonous. It's the opposite of civilization. Civilization doesn't require it, and vengeance itself just becomes a vector of poison. And sadly, to me, this is a possible future. This is something that we could be creating with all the other poisons that we're putting into the air and into the soil and into the water, this civilizational poison.
I was doing emergency broadcasting in the 2011 floods in Brisbane, and the most astonishing thing happened. All these groups, particularly of young people, just self-organised, and we're going around as self-organised volunteers to help people out in the most flood-affected areas. And this brings us to another myth that, the thin veneer of civilization, if you scratch it, people turn feral. Again, I found it's just the opposite. What do you think about all that, Tim?
No, I agree. I think there's a kind of a lazy nihilism in that idea as well, as though, there's this imperative or this kind of logic or this inevitability that, man is wolf to man, as someone said in a previous generation when there was only one gender.
How did people have sex and children in those times? That's right.
I feel sorry for the wolf, though.
Like as Max Gillies once said, men had mateship and women presumably had some other kind of an arrangement.
No, I actually think that and it shouldn't be these moments, and I don't think we always need to go to these heightened catastrophic moments where you see the best in people, because you see it in tiny moments as well. When an old person falls over in the street, you don't very often actually see 50 people step over that person and continue on their busy way to work. And when somebody has a flat tire, people feel good about doing good. And we just forget and devalue that. And sometimes we're only looking for the failures in each other and the failures in our system and the failures in our leaders. I mean, our leaders, sadly, are giving us florid examples of failure daily. But I think people demonstrate their curiosity and their goodness and their desire to connect and the nutrition they feel in just doing simple, good things. And, you know, I spent a lot of time in the country. I've spent most of my adult life in National Party seats, which is a nice, polite way of saying, you know, most of the people I know are rednecks. But they're good people. I mean, there are malign people among them. But the really weird thing is that when the shit hits the fan, they show up. You know, if there's a fire, if someone's back goes out or they have a stroke and they can't get the crop in, people show up. And maybe I'm desperately holding on to that, but I still think we have reason to be proud of our humanity and to value it and to nurture it, because in the end, that's all we have. But that's not nothing.
This requires what a friend of mine calls getting outside of the silo of our phones and enjoying some kind of, I don't know, makes it sound worse than it is, fleshy intimacy with each other, to actually sort of be in the presence of one another as we are all here in this room, sitting close by people that need to sit next to them and learn to put up with the things that are a bit irritating about them and enjoy the things you love about them and laugh together and all those things. This is the world in a way that has survived in your book hundreds of years into the future. There's a hamlet where the narrator lives with his mother, and civility is so important in this place, and composure, politeness, helping each other where you can. It's not a Mad Max world in your book at all, is it, Tim?
No, it's not. And I think people have... I think when you're living in extremis, I hadn't thought of it until just now, but they're kind of living the way people who go to do a season or a year in the Antarctic live. You know, if you're in the Antarctic on a research station, or if you're in a space station, aside from all the technical things having to go right all the time and for you to be assiduous about safety and all the technical aspects, the most precious thing in a situation, whether it's an Antarctic station or a space station, is the maintenance of civility. Because when that starts to curdle, you're in a world of trouble. There is no sustaining that world. In the hamlet, the lives that people are leading, they are essentially extremophiles, like all the species that currently live in that part of the world around Ningaloo. They're all adapted to live just on the edge. And if you push anything out of shape in terms of civility, then it's that scene that did so much probably psychological damage and imaginatively moved me so much as a child when 2001, when Hal expels the astronaut Dave Bowman into space. You know, just that's what, when civility ends, someone goes out, or in real terms, everyone goes out.
Into the airless vacuum.
And I think we can do better than that. We're not fated to be expelled from the garden or the capsule or the space station or the Antarctic. We have the resources, we have the creativity, we have the genius, we have the history and the knowledge to do better, to do right, to do what's required.
And although you show us what lies a long way down the road, on the road that we're on, we seem to be on, I thought that Juice was the work of someone who refuses to despair. Is that right? And do you see despair as a kind of a sin in the present moment?
Well, I don't see it as a virtue, put it that way. I've never noticed it to help. And I've also just noticed there are some people who kind of swooningly go to despair really quickly. You know, Les Murray had this lovely line about people shopping in despair's boutiques, and I have enormous respect for the courage of people who refuse to accept despair as some kind of fate as a logical outcome. I think there's the courage in trying and the courage in seeing every moment of jeopardy as a moment of potential. Because, essentially that's civilizations rise and fall on moments of jeopardy and potential. And we're at a moment in our civilization, I think, where we are in jeopardy, and we should treat it as a moment of potential where we can rise to the moment and be our best selves. That might mean breaking some things and some habits and some institutions, and, it might mean depriving some people of their enormous oligarchic privileges by one means or another. But we're about to go into elections, and this is a good opportunity for us to seize the moment and to reach for potential, not to somehow accept despair or callous nihilism.
Just in conclusion, there's a wonderful line in your book where one of the characters is talking about passion, and she says, without passion, a soul is just latent force and possibility, like the flint waiting for the shock of the iron. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Tim Winton.
Thank you, Richard.
Tim Winton's novel is called Juice. Huge thanks to Louise Adler and Suzanne Critchley at Adelaide Writers' Week, and to Kat and the team at the Town Hall, and to Russell from ABC Adelaide for the sound recording. This conversation was produced on the lands of the Kaurna people. Producer is Nicola Harrison. Executive producer is Carmel Rooney. I'm Richard Feidler. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Richard Feidler. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.